allowing each of the two panelists to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about themselves. So we'll start with you, Josh.
Yeah, Josh Norris. I'm currently a community organizer for about another day, and I'll be working as a teacher for Ta'adan starting on next Monday. I was born in Crescent City and raised, for the most part, in Eugene, Oregon, and came here around about LA about 10 years ago through LA. Started teaching at Klamath River Early College. I've done various other jobs since then. But teaching is definitely my calling, and I'm looking forward to get back into it.
My name is Abby, and I was born in San Francisco because my mother and her sisters actually left the reservation. They all went down there during World War II, as a lot of people did, to work in war industry. All married guys down there and all moved home. So that was pretty much it. So I was raised in Humboldt County, went to all of my schooling there until I went to law school. So I've been back and forth basically between San Francisco and Humboldt and or Del Norte all my life. I did spend 20 years on the bench in San Francisco, primarily in the family law division. And in that division we did delinquency, dependency, and family law. It was an interesting court, it was an interesting assignment. I was the first Native American in California to become a member of the bar. So they were exciting times, and they were unpleasant times for a lot of different people. But I think that things have changed a lot. I'm happy to be home. I spend most of my time here now, primarily in Klamath, where I am the chief judge at the tribe. And we're working very hard to create a justice system that is really reflective of what I believe we would have evolved into. So that's pretty much what we're doing.
Thank you. Judge Abby, what do teachers and administrators need to know about the history of natives in Del Norte County?
I mean, you all are, I have a lot of faith, and I have done very well with teachers many of whom have gone out of their way to assist me personally, or I would not be sitting here today. And I think that in part you have to let yourselves do what you're really good at, which is teach and to study and to learn. For me, I look at the history, and it's an ugly history. I mean, it is. There's not much you can do about that. It's like trying to teach World War II and not mention the Jewish question. Oh well, it'd be really hard to do. You have to, and you have to come to terms with it. But coming to terms with it, I think what everybody has done is kind of avoid it, and that's left both sides not able to communicate. And to me, that was a huge mistake for everybody. We got ourselves in a position where we survived because we were invisible, and now we're invisible, and that's not a good thing. So one thing works in one time, and in another time, it really isn't to your advantage. So what I would say, to look at the history, to look at there were massacres, there were the whole indentured slave issue and the boarding school issues, and just the bad relationships between the two communities. A young person was asking me the other day, well, do you think the judicial system is fair? And I said, well, you have a situation where you look at the first Chief Justice of the state of California, and Chief Justice is a very serious, important role. And the guy's name was Serenus Hastings, a very famous law school is named after him. And if you look at all of the newspapers in the Sacramento and Covelo area, he hired people to kill Indians. That's what he did. And then he's the Chief Justice. And that kind of relationship with that system is not really good. Because you can't suppose in your own mind that people are being treated fairly when you see that. When you see him getting away with that, when you see him paying this money to have these things happen, and there being no repercussions for him. He gets to be Chief Justice, and we get to be dead. That doesn't seem to be like a really good trade-off. But those things can be taught, and there are positives too that people have to look at. people say to me, well, what, give me a positive. I'll say, well, if you look at the relationship, say, between certain groups of people, say the Irish and Indian people. I mean, now there's being a lot more study about it because there's such a close relationship between certain tribes in Ireland. And where's the biggest monument outside of this country to Indian people? Ireland. And just things like that you have to, and why? It wasn't just because somebody woke up one day and decided they're going to build a monument. I mean, there's a relationship, and those kinds of things we don't really have, that relationship, that discussion. And I think they're important. And the newspaper articles, and there's a lot of books that we have access to now. And you read those newspaper articles, and anybody who's sitting here today is going to what's a nice word for barf, but it's not going to make anybody in this room happy, because it was ugly, and that's all you can say about it. But you have to figure out how to deal with ugly. Both sides have to learn how to deal with it and move forward. And I guess that's what I would say is look at that and not explain it away, put it in context, and try to figure out what to do with it. And I'll speak a little bit more about the impact of that in terms of how it then impacts how we parent or how we teach or our relationship with the schools after a bit.
So Josh, what do you feel that administrators and teachers need to know about Native history in Del Norte County?
Yeah, I think that California has a really unique history in that it's quite recent. So you can't teach the local Native history here the same as anywhere else in the country. So for example, I can go back like 4 generations. My great-great-great-grandmother actually started a war between 2 villages because she killed a cavalry person who was trying to rape her, or who was raping her. She was pregnant. And so if you think about that in terms of like how many generations is it? It's just a few. That story's still told in my family. And some of the effects of that war and that incident are still felt. Like there is still conflict between the tribes in these villages over that incident that are alive and well today. And we'll talk a little bit more about the historical trauma piece later and how that impacts people, especially just a few short generations down the road. I think that the most important, in terms of education and how it affects our students, is the displacement of a way of life and the replacement with another one that's not familiar. I think that that's a really important history to look at. So, for example, now I want to make sure that before we go into all this, that people understand that, when we're talking about these ugly truths, it's not to make anyone feel bad or guilty or responsible. It's just that we can't move forward unless we acknowledge the truth and the history. And so when I talk about cultural differences, I am also not berating or one culture over another or anything like that. So I've learned in my life a few things about the way things were done before contact, and our culture and how we handle disputes and that kind of thing. A couple of things that I learned that I think are key differences are that one thing I was taught is that Yurok people traditionally didn't settle disputes with fights and brawls. We had different ways of this. In fact, it was considered disrespectful and taboo to hit somebody with a closed fist. It was just never done. And so we settled disputes with the stick game, which we can get into a little bit later maybe on this. And I've recently learned from some of my relatives that in Hopau Village, which is one of the villages I come from, they train to be rock fighters. And I don't know if any of you have heard of this, but it was new to me. But anyway, if two guys had a dispute or disagreement, they could settle it by having a rock fight, be about the distance from me to this table, and they'd each have a pile of rocks about that size, and you'd have to stand there, and the only thing you could do is move your upper body to sort of avoid the rock, and I guess the last guy standing was the winner. So the introduction of this horrific violence, we did have warriors and people, and we did have wars between villages, but like I said, they were settled in different ways. And so this introduction of violence and this way of educating people is a relatively new thing as well. And so I think that clash of those different cultural ideas, with these settlers coming in who tended to be very violent, versus this way of life that has been continuing for thousands of years, is the most significant.